Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. Here's the president of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Welcome to Lake George Battlefield Moments. This is John Denuzzo of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. Our guest is Sean Kelleher, municipal historian for the town of Saratoga. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. And I know there's a lot we can talk about. We'll be talking this week, particularly about the town of Saratoga. And for the uninitiated, can you please explain the difference between the town of Saratoga and the city of Saratoga Springs, governmentally, geographically, and so on?
Sure. The town of Saratoga at one point included most of Saratoga County. There were originally 4 towns. And from those 4 towns, everybody kind of broke off. And into the 19th century, Saratoga Springs broke off from the town of Saratoga, in part because it was developing in such a way with the downtown section that people wanted more resources. So initially they were a village, and then they became a town first, then village for extra resources, and then ultimately a city. And that's really to support the infrastructure within the city itself. But along the Hudson River and kind of south of Fish Creek, most of that is the town of Saratoga, and we also border Saratoga Lake.
Ah, I see. Okay, so the communities within your town have witnessed some incredible moments in American history. I mean, even before America was created. Would you just tell us about a few of the most special historic sites in the town of Saratoga?
Probably one of the major sites is the sword surrender site. That's where Burgoyne passed over the sword and surrendered the first complete British army in world history to the upstart Americans. General Gates received that. So that's a relatively new site that has been developed with the National Park Service and other partners. That's been developed within the last 20 years, and it's been pretty excited to see that. But as you look from that site, you look over a farm field to the Hudson River, and that's where one of our first battles happened during King George's War. There was a French and Indian attack that came down, and they attacked the settlement at Saratoga. They took a number of captives, including over 60 African slaves, up into Canada. And that's where we get the story of Peter Cook. Peter Cook was an Abenaki African young boy who was captured by the French. They thought they had a slave. His mother, who was Abenaki, said, nope, he's Native American. The Mohawks recognized that. And then Peter Cook goes on to have this amazing life. He fights in the French and Indian War, and then he comes back. At this point, he's with the Oneidas, and he ends up going out to see George Washington during the siege of Boston. He fights here at the battles of Saratoga, and he earns the title colonel. So there's correspondence between General Schuyler and General Washington referring to him as colonel. So one of our points of pride is not only do we have the highest ranking Native American at that point, but we have the first and highest ranking African American officer who comes from our community.
Oh, good. For those who aren't familiar with King George's War, what was the time? What years was that fought?
It happened in 1745. You know, similar to many of these wars, there's a European version, which was known as the War of Austrian Succession, and then there's a North American, which is what we call King George's War. But it's one of these series of wars between the French and the English in North America to kind of control North America, but it was all fought in our little chain right here, you know, up the Hudson River, Lake George, Lake Champlain. You know, this was the warpath for many, many wars, and this was one of those wars.
Wow. Okay. Well said. Now, there's so much, and the town of Saratoga is very big geographically, but I'm sure, as we all have favorites, there are probably 1 or 2 historic sites in the town that are special favorites of yours. So which ones do you find yourself bringing people to or going to in your private moments?
Yeah, I had already mentioned the sword surrender site. I have very, very tight ties through my family with the Schuyler House. And I think what the National Park Service and their curator has done in the house is just beautiful. It's truly an 18th century house. and it has lots of energy and lots of color as they did in the 18th centuries. We kind of normally have this image of a Puritan kind of background, but it was anything but that in the 18th century. It was live, it was lively, and that house reflects that. And what I really also enjoy doing is back of that property leads to the old Champlain Canal towpath that goes literally from the Schuyler house all the way out to Lock 5 Island, Hudson Crossing, and a place called Eagles Point. And it's a beautiful walking trail. You have the canal on one side and the Hudson River on the other. And I just absolutely love that. That's when I try to get away to someplace, that's one of those places that I really enjoy. And when we put together our Knox event back in December, one of the things that I was most proud of is that we actually took the train of artillery down through that. And part of the reason that I was so proud of it is that many of these reenactors, living historians who were with us, have been long-term friends of mine, and I wanted to share that special spot with them. And we were able to, as the snow was falling, and it was just an absolute beautiful moment for people to enjoy.
Again, very well described, and I've had my own special moments actually in Schuylerville and in the town of Saratoga, because the history there is so all-encompassing, let's say. And when you get to a more primitive part along the canal, along the river certainly, or even on the property of Schuyler, you can really sense that. I definitely echo your sentiments, and people should visit the Schuyler house, even though it's run by the Park Service, correct?
Yeah, it's run by the Park Service. Normally in the summer, it's open weekends, but every year, there'll be little tweaks in the schedule, so it's best to check either their website or give their visitor center a phone call. Got
it. Now, Sean, you and I have known each other a few years, and I know you haven't always lived in Saratoga, so where else were you involved in American history? How'd you wind up here?
Originally, I grew up in the Boston area, and I was lucky to be born that I was able to participate in the bicentennial. So I'm going back recently through some photos, and 1981 I was at Yorktown, and I remember in 1976 the Queen coming to Boston for our bicentennial. Through that effort, when it came up to the 225th anniversary, I was very involved in planning Lexington and Concord and the large reenactments there. I was involved in a lot of living history organizations and helped out with a number of events. Along the way, I met my wife, who was a farmer's daughter from Saratoga. She spent a little bit of time as a seasonal at Saratoga National Historical Park, so she was comfortable with reenactments. Came out to a reenactment. We met in Connecticut. That's how I ended up here. I moved from New Hampshire to here. When I was in New Hampshire, I worked for New Hampshire Public Television, so I learned how to tell stories. My background was in TV production, and it wasn't a big jump to move from doing that type of work to becoming a municipal historian.
I guess. And you've been the municipal historian at Saratoga how long?
23-ish years, something like that.
Wonderful. I'm sure there are a number of very special moments you've had in that role. How can people find out more about the historic locations in your town?
Normally the National Park Service website's great, but we're building all sorts of apps and resources at Saratoga 250. So Saratoga 250 is what I would suggest. We're creating this app where people can download it. They can figure out their way around because there's mapping programs, but we're also working at telling the historical stories, the accurate stories of what happened on the landscape. And those can pop up on your phone or your iPad, and we can really make history come to life at that location. So we're really excited about developing this. Some of the items are going to be ready to go for this season, and then more items will develop as we keep on going towards this 250th.
Great, Sean. Very informative. And Sean Kelleher has a lot more to share with us, and he'll return next week to discuss specifics on plans in Schuylerville and throughout Saratoga County to commemorate America's 250th birthday. And we look forward to that. Well, thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Our Alliance website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org. We thank you for being a part of our history.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more information or to check out the latest podcast, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and listen live on Saturday mornings at 9:40 a.m. to Lake George Battlefield Moments on 93.5 Lake FM.